Hey, I'm Andrew with 10 Minute Therapy, and today we're going to continue our look at anxiety. Over the last few videos, we've examined what anxiety is, where it comes from, and how we respond to it. But in this video and in next week's video, we're going to look at two different pathways that anxiety takes into the brain. And so in today's video, we'll examine the top-down form of anxiety, and in next week's video, we'll examine what we call bottom-up anxiety. So let's go ahead and get the timer started. We'll get right to it. So as we've been examining anxiety, there's a few things that we've started with, such as what is anxiety, where is anxiety coming from, and then what are things I can do in response to anxiety to maybe help calm down those processes and take control back. But what we want to examine in today's video, and then again in next week's video, is that there are actually two different pathways through which anxiety is created within the brain. In today's video, we're going to examine what we call top-down anxiety, and in next week's video, we'll examine its opposite, bottom-up anxiety. So to start with, we need to do a quick recap that essentially when we've discussed anxiety thus far, we've examined there are different parts of the brain that are at play in any of this process. To start with, we have something known as our frontal cortex that is located directly behind your forehead. Your frontal cortex has the job of thinking rationally and logically, planning, thinking abstractly, and last but not least, your frontal cortex is responsible for managing your emotions. Doesn't mean that our frontal cortex stifles emotions, ignores emotions, or suppresses emotions, but rather just that it manages these emotions. So, in addition to the frontal cortex, the other system of the brain we've looked at is known as the limbic system. Your limbic system is located connecting off of your brain stem and into your neck. And the limbic system is responsible for a lot of your necessary life functions such as breathing, heartbeat, body temperature, digestion, things we can't live without. But deep within that limbic system, we've learned that there is a small part of the brain known as the amygdala. And your amygdala, we've likened to a smoke detector. The amygdala is watching and looking for threats of danger, and when it believes that it has detected danger, it alerts you, just like a smoke detector would. However, its alert system is what we call the fight or flight response. That's also known as sympathetic response. And so when we look at top-down anxiety, what we are suggesting is that the anxiety is coming from the top of our brain, our frontal cortex, down into the limbic system, creating the amygdala response. And so this type of anxiety is different from the bottom-up anxiety that we'll examine next time, which is often more triggered by external factors and stimuli. In top-down anxiety, what we're suggesting is that anxiety is actually originating in our prefrontal cortex. That means that anxiety isn't coming from some outside source. It's actually coming from within me, and more specifically within my frontal cortex. This part of my brain that's responsible for thinking and reasoning, for logical processing, future planning, the part of our brain we use to make sense out of the world around us and think abstractly about things even. This part of our brain in a top-down anxiety is actually triggering the amygdala response in the back of the brain, hence why we call it a top-down. And so what does this mean? Well, what we're suggesting in a top-down anxiety is that anxiety isn't coming from the world around you. It's actually coming from within your own thinking. That's right. That means our thinking, our very own thinking, thoughts within my mind have the power and the ability to trigger an amygdala response. Think of it like this. Within my frontal cortex, though I can think rationally and logically, I can also find myself engaging in what we often refer to as cognitive distortions, something we'll visit on a later video in. But in my frontal cortex, I can engage in thinking like what if type thinking. We're all guilty of what if thinking on occasion. It's the type of thoughts we have where we think, what if this happens? What if this happens? And while we can engage in, call it a positive what if thinking, what if I win the lottery? What if I get that promotion at work? And we dream and we plan out how these scenarios might look. Oftentimes, when we engage in what if thinking, what we're actually doing is engaging in really negative loops of thought. It might look like, what if this bad thing happens? What if the car next to me swerves into me and causes an accident? What if I step outside today and I slip and fall and hurt myself, or God forbid, have to go to the hospital? What if I get fired? We do this what if thinking as human beings, but it's not a particularly productive form of thinking. And so what we're saying in a top-down approach is that if I were to engage in what if thinking long enough, that my very thinking about all these scary, negative, maybe even terrible scenarios can actually trick my amygdala into responding as if I were actually in danger. It's an interesting thought because the amygdala's job is to detect danger around us. But if you recall, we gave this analogy of the amygdala being a lot like a smoke detector, right? With a smoke detector, you don't smell smoke in your house and run and turn on the smoke detector to see if it activates. No, instead, your smoke detector is always on. And when it detects smoke, it alerts you. But as we've said before, sometimes the smoke that's in my house isn't due to an electrical fire or a dangerous fire or a structural fire. Sometimes I've just burned bacon in the oven. But the smoke detector doesn't know that. The smoke detector doesn't have the responsibility of rationalizing burnt food versus a life-threatening scenario. And so the smoke detector does its one job, and it alerts you that there's smoke in the house. Well, in the same way, your amygdala doesn't always get the information right. All it knows is that it believes something is a dangerous threat to you, and it reacts with your fight or flight response. And what we're suggesting is that in this top-down anxiety, our amygdala confuses the signals coming from your frontal cortex, all these negative thoughts and these terrible things you're imagining and living in, and it reacts as though those things are very real and happening right now. And therefore, you need your fight or flight response, and that it does all the things we've talked about in our video on anxiety in the body. It triggers a cortisol release, an adrenaline surge into your body, tightening muscles, speeding up heart rate, lungs breathing shallow and faster, muscles releasing glucose for energy burn. And all that is happening when you might be perfectly safe. All that is happening because in your prefrontal cortex, you've been living in a place of fear and worry. And all those negative, fearful, worried thoughts are scaring or tricking or confusing amygdala response as if they were real, as if you are actually in danger. And we see this happen a couple ways. The what if thinking is just one example. Another word that we like to use as counselors or therapists sometimes is the word catastrophizing. It's an interesting word because catastrophizing is actually a made-up word. A catastrophe, we know what that is. A natural disaster, that's a catastrophe. A building fire, that's a catastrophe. Financial collapse, that's a catastrophe. These are big, terrible, scary scenarios. But in catastrophizing, in this made-up word, catastrophizing, we're turning it into essentially a verb, something we do. We're saying that I catastrophize a scenario. In other words, something happens, like maybe I go to work and I get an email from my boss that says, I need you in my office at 10 a.m. Now, in my mind, I might be able to rationally think, my boss is calling me in to discuss a new project, to talk about ways that we can improve what we're doing. But I might also catastrophize. I might take that one little email that says, meet me in my office at 10 a.m. And in my mind, I can play out all kinds of catastrophes. My boss is going to fire me. I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. And then I'm going to lose my house, my family. They're not going to be able to eat. I don't know what I'm going to do. All that can happen in our minds just like that in a split second. And as you sit in that looped, anxious, what if thinking, catastrophizing type thinking, jumping to conclusions without really any evidence to support it, you might be physically safe, But your amygdala doesn't know the difference. In fact, it believes that all these things you're thinking about are very real and a very present danger. And so it does its one job and it reacts. And so in top-down anxiety, we have our prefrontal cortex that gets caught in these loops of negative thinking, and our amygdala is reacting and responding as if all those things are real. So in my last 30 seconds in this video, we want to answer the question, what do we do about that? If that's the case, if I'm engaging in some negative thinking that's causing top-down anxiety, we'll go back to our video on how to respond to anxiety, part 2, and what you'll see is that we can engage in slowing down our thinking, trying to lean into rationality and logic thinking, and tell myself, this is not real, I'm okay, and I'm safe. As you can see, we've run out of time pretty quickly in this video. Please join us next week. We're going to go from top-down anxiety to then examining what is bottom-up anxiety. So, as I say each time, if you've heard something today that sounds like something maybe you've engaged in, some top-down anxiety, some cognitive distortion stemming from what-if thinking or catastrophizing, if any of these things hit home, I encourage you, I implore you, go talk to a counselor, talk to a therapist. Get someone who can guide you personally and individually through these types of things. In the meantime, I'm Andrew with 10 Minute Therapy. God bless.